and welcome to Energy News Face to Face. Today we are assembling what I honestly call the natural hydrogen Avengers. Depending on who you follow, natural hydrogen is either the missing piece of net zero or the crypto of geology. Our job in the next few hours is to figure out which parts are real, which parts are wishful thinking, and which parts should be quietly escorted out of the room. I'm Arnout Everts, founder of EnergyNews.biz. I'll be your host, referee, and part-time translator when we go too deep into acronyms. This is not a fan club meeting. No hype, no hit jobs, just three people who actually know what they're talking about, agreeing and disagreeing in public like adults. Now let me introduce my guests for today. Douglas Wicks is an independent geohydrogen advisor and critical mineral mining expert, fresh from 6 years at ARPA-E. He advises companies like Prometheus Hydrogen, HyTerra, Addis Energy, and others. When someone says, we just need to scale this, Doug is the guy who has to ask, with what money and who's taking the first lawsuit? Doug, welcome.
Thank you very much, Arnout. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite and the chance to talk. As you indicated in the introduction, I've been involved with geologic hydrogen, what in the field appears like a long time. It's a very new field, but the work that we sponsored at ARPA-E was the first really competitive funding that was put out on the street. And the focus there was on simulation and engineering, and I'll come back to that. And my current activities do go across the value chain. Looking at how do we understand the production side of it with HyTerra. How do we look at transport, and purification with Prometheus. And how do we do chemistry with it? With my activities with Addis Energy. And in between are a number of others I don't talk about, by the way.
Thank you.
I also, I'm engaged now with Renaissance Philanthropy, which announced at HNAT a challenge in the field. And so I'm also involved in the philanthropic side. So I've gone the full range of government to philanthropic with a lot of private activities in between. That really kind of mimics my history. My overall thoughts about hydrogen to set the stage here are one. You're going to ask me a question already?
Yeah, no. Actually, I will go to setting the stage just after this.
Okay.
But
all right.
Thanks for the introduction to yourself. My next guest is Arnout Everts. Arnout has 35 years of subsurface experience in oil and gas, geothermal, CO2 storage, and natural hydrogen. He has built and sold consultancy, signed off reserves as Eurogeologist, and written some of the most cited work in natural hydrogen resources. If geology had a tax authority, Arnout would be the auditor you nervously tidy your models for. Arnout, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Arnout. Yeah, it's also a pleasure to be here and to basically share thoughts with Doug and Vitaly and yourself. Just a little bit about myself and my background and how I got into this natural hydrogen scene. So indeed, I'm a geoscientist by background, but I have done a lot of very varied integrated subsurface work. So I know a fair bit about what's called reservoir engineering. I know a fair bit about petrophysics. I've done over the last 15 years, a lot of the technical work I've done was in the area of what people call techno-commercial due diligence and certification. So I have a fairly good overview of what it takes to go from a prospective resource, so something, a resource that may or may not be in the subsurface and which is fairly speculative at a given point, to eventually a producing venture that makes money. And so with that new I come into this natural hydrogen field, the other thing I want to say is that I have no commercial interest in natural hydrogen whatsoever. So I'm not on the board of any company. I'm not in an advisor to specific companies. My sole interest here is that I'm a concerned global citizen, and I firmly believe that we have a duty to now get on with this energy transition and reduce emissions and basically push towards zero net as soon as we can. So therefore, I look at natural hydrogen and I hear people say, okay, this can be one of a game changer for energy transition. So that's what I want to know. Can it really be? What would it take? What for this natural hydrogen to scale up to materiality? What would
Yeah.
it take to basically decarbonize industries? So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much. And finally, Vitaly Vidavskiy. Vitaly heard about primordial hydrogen back in 1980s, before I was born. Spent decades in upstream oil and gas, and now runs Avalio, focused on natural hydrogen exploration and development know-how. He has been working on white hydrogen since before I had a good marketing name. If you think primordial hydrogen sounds crazy, remember, that's what people said about plate tectonics once. Vitaly, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Ernest, for having me. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this conversation. Yeah, that's true. I first heard of natural hydrogen in 1985, being a year one student at the Moscow State Uni, when a friend of mine, my classmate back then, Nikolai Larin, took me to his father's seminar at the Soviet Academy of Science, which was, it was a very interesting time back then. Lots of revolutionary ideas flying around, and not just in geology, as you may remember. And I joined the Larin's group in 2005 when I came back to Moscow from 3 years spent in Australia. Back then, I was deep in oil and gas upstream with the field servicing companies, Baker Hughes, Halliburton, and National Oil Varco, and the likes. And since my passion was to build small companies from the scratch, bring them to the new markets, so Nikolai basically invited me to work as an executive director for the what became the first company in the world to commercialize natural hydrogen, because back then in 2005, Nikolai and his father, Vladimir Larin, they basically finalized their concept and decided to start commercializing it. So we spent 5 years together. I worked pro bono, of course, no pay, because my primary career kept me with oil and gas servicing companies mostly. But we've done a couple of good things. And now so I left oil and gas career in 2018. In 2020, in the midst of COVID lockdown, I was approached by Nikolai once again. He asked me to help him with translation of his late father's book into English. And this is how I got involved again, now full-time. We established Avalio in 2021. First as a sole trader, now it's a full-blown commercial entity. So we are into commercialization again. Same story as 20 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vitaly. So before we start, let's set some ground rules, but just after a short break.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
So, gentlemen, attack ideas, not people. Evidence over vibes. Data, methods, and field results in. Fairy tales are out. If someone makes you change your mind, you just accept it, celebrate it, and continue. Let's try to bring in our topics for today and make our audience leave this conversation less confused than they arrived. So the whole KPI for today is to give some explanations. And today's topics are: from high purity shows to real commercial reserves. When do anomaly maps become actual assets? Origin models, serpentinization versus primordial, and why it changes where you drill. Natural hydrogen codes and disclosures, building trust before the hype crashes. How natural hydrogen actually fits into energy system, not just conference slides. Before we start with our topics, each speaker will have 7 minutes to present their own views on natural hydrogen. Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
It's showtime!
We're starting with Arnout first. Arnout, your 7 minutes begin now.
Yeah, okay, so let me share my screen, if I can. The whole screen.
Yes.
Entire screen, yes, share, okay. So like I mentioned before, I have no commercial interest myself in natural hydrogen. I want to know, can this scale up to become a material contributor to industry decarbonization and the energy transition? So that is why I ask myself the question, first of all, what would natural hydrogen projects have to look like to contribute materially to industry decarbonization? So I think it's useful, and that's what I'm going to try in my 7 minutes, to first look at what industry demand for hydrogen is like. So right now, the world is actually using close to 100 million tons of hydrogen every year for fertilizers, because ammonia, NH3, the hydrogen needs to come from somewhere. And then for petroleum refining, so cracking long chain hydrocarbons. And then people are talking also about using it for steel making. And here, the graph that you see shows on the vertical axis in the logarithmic scale how much hydrogen per year these kind of facilities use. So a typical petroleum refinery uses about 50,000 tons of hydrogen per year. A full-scale ammonia plant uses close to 300,000 tons of hydrogen per year. And right now, almost all the hydrogen these facilities are using comes from fossil fuels without CO2 capture. So this contributes very significantly to global CO2 emissions and hence risk of global warming. And also in a successful energy transition, since we still need food and we still have to make plastics and all of this, most of this demand is going to stay. It scores high on the so-called hydrogen ladder of competitiveness. But like I said, very big quantities of hydrogen, these kind of an individual facility needs. Then there are smaller, more applications of hydrogen people are talking about that may exist in future. Things like heating maybe, or fueling station for hydrogen vehicles, maybe fueling stations for hydrogen jets, if in the future there will be such a thing. Now, right now, hardly any of those exist. So it's a more speculative and risky type of hydrogen application. And that's why, and also there are, for a lot of these things, there are equally good or better alternatives than hydrogen, which is why on this ladder of competitiveness, these things score relatively low. So as an application, they're more risky than the big industrial applications that right now exist. So if you imagine being a Coloma or Hytera, if you want to play safe as far as targeting a market, you should target basically the market to the left. Very big quantities of hydrogen. The smaller applications, so a fueling station, for example, still needs at least between 1,000 to 1,500 tons of hydrogen per year. So still substantial quantities. And then not only the quantity matters, also what's very important is the ability to sustain that supply for many years. And why is that? It's because investing money into, for example, converting a steel plant to run on hydrogen rather than on coal, or to basically even smaller applications like a fueling station, the margins will be quite small. So these fellows want to, operating those facilities, they want to lock in hydrogen supply, make sure the hydrogen is there at the purity and with the production level they need for a substantial amount of time. The Oxford Energy Group, for example, they issued a report quite recently on what they thought what they think the sales terms for hydrogen gas sales contracts are going to look like, and they talk about 10 to 15 years contract periods, and then contracts underpinned by certified resource reports, which means an auditor has confirmed that the seller of the hydrogen, so the operator of a natural hydrogen project, for example, that he has proven reserves that basically match 10 or 15 years of supply. So I think this is important to keep in mind when we think, okay, what do we need to do to make hydrogen projects play a material role in decarbonization and find basically a buyer. So then, with that, let's then look at very high level, very conceptually at natural hydrogen. So I look at two metrics. One is what I call resource density, and what is that? It means the amount of resource, in this case hydrogen, per unit area, so tons of hydrogen per square kilometers. And why is it interesting to look at that? It gives you a feel for how big an area you need, a project needs to develop and connect to the resources in that area to supply industrial amounts of hydrogen. For example, if you want to supply to a petroleum refinery at 50,000 tons per year for 10 years, you need to have a resource base of 500,000 tons. And if the resource density of your asset is only 1,000 tons per year, per square kilometer, then it means that your project needs to access resources over a 500 square kilometer area, which is obviously going to be a very massive effort. Whereas if the resource density of your asset is 50,000 tons, then you only need 10 square kilometers. So obviously it gives, looking at this resource density, gives you a feel of, okay, how big an area do I need to prove up and tap into the hydrogen, assuming it's there. And then the bottom graph, which is productivity, well productivity, that gives you a feel for how many wells you need to drill to achieve a certain supply. And again, same example, say a petroleum refinery, 50,000 tons of hydrogen per year. So if the productivity of my well is 1,000 tons per year, then it means I need 50 wells. 10,000 tons, then I need per year, then I only need 5 wells. So obviously these are metrics that are high level but helpful to understand, okay, now what do I need to do? So then let's talk about the colors here. So there's 4 colors here: blue, gray, red, and 2 shades of red. The blue, these are what I call seepages. So hydrogen without much trapping, just seeping to the surface, and I can try and drill wells into the seepage area and produce some of it.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Arnout.
finished?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll stop. I think it's actually
So,
good enough.
yeah, we are going to Doug. Doug, your 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll start from the other side of the process from Arnaud. He has the massive gloom and doom, and I will start from the other side and hydrogen. And I think the first thing everyone needs to understand, or not understand, to take into account, is the Earth is naturally producing hydrogen. This is a natural process. It's not against thermodynamics or physics or something else. It's just happily generating hydrogen through a variety of mechanisms, which Vitaly has his opinions and others have theirs. And so my thoughts about hydrogen: one, it's really easy to find. I look at people exploring for it, and it's everywhere. I mean, it's coming from a variety of sources. It's coming out of the earth. You can find it in geysers. It's hard to find, though, at concentrations that are relevant. This is a big challenge. And it's actually extremely hard to find deposits, naturally existing deposits, that are economically relevant. To go back to Arno's numbers, we need millions of tons for some applications. And actually, no one's really reported yet finding, that gusher out there that would make Arnaud happy. His comments on every post out there is, "What are the flow rates?" That's not been done yet. But I kind of look at it from the beginning and say, again, the Earth is naturally producing hydrogen. There's understood mechanisms in doing this. And I'm actually agnostic to a lot of the mechanisms that are out there. And I look at it and say that we can engineer solutions to these. It becomes an engineering problem. Nature is naturally doing it. It's coming up from the subsurface. It's chemical reactions for the most part. Chemical reactions can be controlled, they can be stimulated, and they can be engineered. Take whatever word you want to use to identify that, and can be brought forward. And I think the recent results shown by Alexis Templeton from Oman that she disclosed at HNAT clearly show that you can go into a system that has no hydrogen at depth, and through this simple injection of water, cause the evolution of fairly large volumes of hydrogen. Again, this was a test that was run. It's exploratory. I view it really as proof, though, that one can engineer these systems and increase the yields of hydrogen at yield. There are a number of other companies out there who are looking at how do we stimulate this, how do we catalyze this reaction to make it faster and address large volumes of the subsurface. And this is quite key. There are a number of missing links, and so we know we can control it. And I've talked with a number of teams that are showing very promising results. And the laboratory results come back and say, we can do this. And then I talk to engineers on the other side, drilling companies, and they're like, we can do this. And you talk to end users, such as Arnaud has talked about, they say, we want it. And so there are missing links in between. I think the key challenges we're facing, and I'm trying to work with teams to do this, are really understanding and quantifying the resource. What are the reserves? You need that 500,000 tons of potential to go to a bank and say, give me money for 20 years worth of production. To supply a small facility. And we do not have those in place right now. And that's kind of what the discussions coming out of Renaissance philanthropy is looking at, is saying, okay, let's use open data and share data to come back and define what those resources and reserves look like from the different routes, whether it's a natural accumulation that's there and replenishing, or it's one we're going to engineer to take place. And then that leads to what we call in the U.S. the catch-22. What comes first? You can't really do the resource assessment without producing, and nobody will give you the money to produce if you don't have a customer for that. And so I think the big challenge we're really faced with is, how do we monetize that first kilogram? That first kilogram out of the ground. And we don't want to be in the situation that tight shale gas was, that you had the entire industry waited until some crazy guy in Texas actually produced for 10 years. But he had a market again. Natural gas had a market. And so what are we going to do with the hydrogen as we develop it? And I would differ from Arnaud to say nobody's going to move a steel mill to one of these places until you can show this. And so how do we monetize? And the work that I'm doing with Prometheus hydrogen is coming back to say, can we trap this hydrogen? Can we then move it into the merchant market, which is very large, at least in the United States, to go forward? So we need to come up with good solutions to say, how do we monetize during that reserve and resource characterization phase? And that's really the big catch-22 is finding those markets and customers that allow you to do that. And that's kind of where I am. As I say, I'm very optimistic, but we have big challenges.
You are right on time. I'm beginning to think that you already have your stopwatch.
I watch my stopwatch. I am very anal retentive about being on time.
Now, Vitaly, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll start my stopwatch to be precise. It's great to see such a huge number of enthusiasts and commercial people and engineers all of a sudden working on natural hydrogen after being alone on this vast landscape for so many years. So it's great to see that natural hydrogen is finally recognized, which happened about 7, maybe 10 years ago. And we remember when it started. If I could share my screen, I will show you where we are, where we're at, what we work on. And so what you see is a small GIF, Jeff, put together by a group of enthusiasts. My son participated in it. He is in IT, so he helped us with turning a steady picture into a GIF picture. So according to Dr. Laren, cut long story short, natural hydrogen as a chemical element was captured by the Earth core in the process of its formation, accretion in scientific language. And it is preserved in the form of hydrides. By the way, a lot of companies, there are several companies working on the subject of hydrogen storage in the metal hydrides. And some of them are successful, and all they do, they just replicate the Mother Nature. They just repeat after Mother Nature. So, I'm not going to deep dive into scientific language too much for the sake of the audience. This brings us to the point of understanding that natural hydrogen is better than renewable. It's eternal, and the amounts, the volumes of hydrogen degassing through the surface of Mother Earth and into the atmosphere and into the open space could be calculated. We have our own assessments. The recent paper published by Dr. Jeffrey Ellis and his colleagues have a slightly different number because they use different methods. But so, cut long story short, we see the natural hydrogen as a commodity for many, many years. And this is what we started working on when we began commercial 20 years ago. In simple terms, in dummy terms, we're looking for the similar, for the well similar that was drilled in Mali, Bugu 1 well, but to a bigger scale, to the commercial scale, and in multiple years. So, and this brought us to the point when we had to develop the go-to-market strategy. Once again, we have a strategy for exploration, we have a strategy for development. So the go-to-market strategy is very simple. It's based on 3 pillars. We have geological concept, indeed, which we worked on for several decades. It wasn't an easy process. It wasn't a rose garden. We have a financial model, which is standard DCF-based commercialization model, which gives us economical and commercial flexibility in terms of putting things together for the potential investors. And the off-taking landscape is very important. We came to this several years ago because if you discover natural hydrogen El Dorado in the middle of nowhere, the distance will kill everything. So we, as a matter of fact, this model was nicknamed hydrogen on demand, because after all, we have to sell this commodity and we have to be commercial from the beginning. And so what we offer to the potential investors and our business partners is to discover, to find commercial quantities, commercial volumes of natural hydrogen as close to their backyard as humanly possible. So just a couple of words of what it started with. The whole hype around natural hydrogen started 15 years ago when a couple of researchers from France traveled to Russia to see Nikolai Larin, his father, and being initially very skeptical, these two gentlemen had a journey of their life, and as a result, they published this book in French. It seems like they spent a lot of happy days together when Nikolai Larin and his team basically showed these two prominent researchers what natural hydrogen was about. And this is how the PR part about natural hydrogen started. So we have several competitive advantages. I'm not going to dwell for a long time on them. The main advantage that we have is that we don't need historical wells to drill the new well for natural hydrogen. The first well in the world was drilled in Nebraska by Nikolai and his team 6 years ago, Horty NE3. It was drilled greenfield, and the results were not commercial, same as the other wells being drilled around the world these days. But the concept was proven back then. This was the most important result of this well that Nikolai drilled before everyone. And this gives us a very good deal of assurance that we will be able to find natural hydrogen to the commercial quantities, same as in Mali. Thank you very much. I'm over.
I just played the bell for the sake of it. So, gentlemen, now we go to the discussion. Just before the first topic, do you want to ask questions right now after the initial part? Anyone? All right.
If I may, I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Douglas Wicks, who, together with Dr. Jeffrey Ellis, have done more than anyone, at least in the States and maybe around the world, for bringing natural hydrogen subject to the attention of administrative powers and government and establishment in the United States, and I mean the hearings at the Capitol Hill a couple of years ago, and so forth. And Arnout is our opponent online mostly. We have very nice conversations. Not that we necessarily hear each other, but at least we discuss it. At least we discuss it. This is the most important thing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Everyone needs a resident skeptic. It's always, to ask the hard questions of, what's the flow rate? Show me flow, and then I'll talk to you. And having a resident skeptic and optimist, you need to have both in the field to challenge, the hype and to come back and really say this is a hard problem.
Maybe if I can, because
Yes, of course.
everybody always thinks the issue is flow rates, and they see me ask about flow rates. Maybe let me clarify one thing. I actually think that the bigger problem is not just flow rates, it's recovery mechanism. So basically, or what other people call reservoir drive mechanism. Now let me explain for just a minute what that is, to try and get everyone on the same page. And say a well is very small compared to the area over which a resource occurs. So the trick of any subsurface resource exploitation is to find a mechanism to draw resource from larger areas towards the well and into the well in response to what you do in the well. And in the well, you would lift fluids. And so you need a recovery mechanism. Now, where I struggle with some of the concepts that are being floated around with natural hydrogen, including, for example, stimulated hydrogen, is what that recovery mechanism would be and how efficient would it be. So, for example, yes, I can inject water into an ultramafic rock and basically make the rock alter around the microfractures and so on and generate some hydrogen. That's fine, but how do I produce most of this hydrogen back to surface in a producer well? This is where I think the bigger problem is. And then the flow rate is almost secondary. The issue is, if out of all this hydrogen that is generated by Mother Earth, if I can't really draw much of this towards and into wells, if I drill wells in resource areas, then I have a problem.
Thank you, Arnout.
Well,
Doug?
and as I continually say, Arno, it's an engineering problem. And everything you've discussed, really, I mean, I look at the advances we've done on oil and gas field, the innovation, the technology advancements, whether it's tight gas and shales, whether it's coal seam gas in Australia, things that were viewed as impossible in the past. The oil fields, the oil companies and the oil field services companies, if you tell them where to drill, what to put down a hole, and how to get it out of a hole, they'll do it.
Yes, but
if there's money to be made.
One remark to add to that. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Indeed, to a large extent, it's an engineering problem. But if you look at technology advancement, for example, in oil and gas, then you realize that a lot of the technologies people have developed, for example, enhanced oil recovery and thermal recovery techniques and so it's technically possible, but it has not been commercially possible in many places. And also, the more you advance in developing these technologies, you often find that there are lots of other considerations. For example, you will produce other things like that you don't want, and that you have to kind of dispose of, or you have to bring in things that basically. So what you find is that there's lots of, if you're talking about engineering solutions, there's usually lots of added cost to bring in stuff and to basically process and dispose stuff that comes up and that you don't want. So that is why I agree with you. Engineering solutions can be looked into, but it will take time. And the chances are these engineering solutions will come with substantial added cost, which means that at the end of the day, the unit cost for produced hydrogen may be substantially higher than what people are talking about right now. Most of the cost estimates for natural hydrogen I've seen, these are people that only include the cost of the wells. And there's not even a completion in the well, let alone pipelines, let alone facilities to process the hydrogen, let alone disposal of water and other gases and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, those are all issues.
Back.
And again, I would come back to the world of tight gas. That one has to remember 30 years ago, the United States was a massive importer of natural gas. We were building LNG import terminals. left and right along the Gulf, and then all of a sudden everyone accepted what was taking place in Texas. In about 2005, it turned. The United States is now the largest exporter of natural gas in the world, and it's going to be even much larger as the things go forward. And the
Yeah.
price points that were, again, once you let loose the field engineering groups on it, they figure out the costs. They figure out how to deal with this. And within the estimates we did at ARPA-E, to say that realistically, we did bring in the entire exploration costs, the site development costs, the post-processing of materials, whether it's reinjection of water, that was taken in as a worst case. And we could still see $1 from where we were at. And that's before we unleashed the innovative potential of the oil field services companies. The production costs now in the United States, I mean, you look at our natural gas prices, they're making money at $2 a million BTUs.
Yeah.
30 years ago, that couldn't have happened.
Thanks,
The
Doug.
cost of stimulated natural gas, was north of $10 a million BTUs. So I think once we identify these resources for them, then we can unleash the power of innovation, in the drilling companies and the stimulation companies and the transport companies. Give them the resource and an incentive, and they will make it work.
I love the fact that I have to interrupt all of you. So back to Vitaly, because now you have the
Yeah.
block of 2 times 2 minutes block.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I spent some time with oil and gas people, and my last work with in the oil and gas field servicing industry was the Packer company, and most of our work was done in the area of fracking. So I think I picked up a couple of things on the way. So first of all, the revolution, the shale gas revolution in the United States didn't happen before everything. All other resources were exhausted or preserved for the future generations, it appeared to be the only way to saturate the starving market. And if you remember, it coincided with the financial crisis, so it helped a lot to bring the economy back on track. If you look at the stimulated hydrogen from the petrophysical viewpoint, there are a lot of questions. First of all, could these flow rates, or could this gas obtained from the well, could it be sustained for a while? So Dr. Templeton successful trials in Oman demonstrated that this is possible, this is feasible, which is yes. Nobody argues that salinization may go along this avenue, as well as a dozen of others. However, once the reaction is over, what's going to happen next? Is the volume of hydrogen going to be produced from such wells steadily? If yes, for how long? So because this is where the commercial things start. And in terms of petrophysics, lots of questions. The several things were borrowed from oil and gas fracking. And fracking process takes place in the 3D matrix in sedimentary sandstones and carbonates. In BIFs, banded iron formations, or olivines, hydrobus ultramafic rocks. These processes mostly take a planar type of reaction, which is 2D, which by several orders of magnitude less efficient, both petrophysically and commercially. Catalysts, reaction control, PT conditions, lots of questions around it, which we don't know the answer yet. The main question is, aren't we rushing into engineering things before actually exhausting all other things with the naturally produced hydrogen? Because what we see from our viewpoint, not all of the means were exhausted for for high streams. In fact, except for QIMC in Canada, not so many companies are really aware of this scenario. And the evaluation companies like RISC, they just start recognizing, admitting that yes, the flux is a very much possible alternative way of conveying hydrogen to the surface. So, cut long story short, summarizing, I believe the industry as a whole haven't done enough to be able to confirm that hydrogen could be produced commercially. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitaly. So, next one for the questions or comments.
Yeah, maybe I go back to my point about resource density. I'm trying to respond to, I think, both Doug and Vitaly's points about basically resource quantities, because I see in basically a lot of people saying, yeah, we don't really know resource quantities, but I feel that you can use similar concepts as what's being used for many decades in resource estimation for petroleum resources, to come up with estimates, indicative at least, of how much resource per unit area in a certain thickness of reservoir you would have for a different type of place. So hydrogen as a trapped gas, or hydrogen dissolved in the aquifer. And in the paper that I published in the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy, and also in some of my conference papers, I've laid out this methodology really clearly. And when you run these numbers, you start realizing that because hydrogen is not very soluble in water, and because it starts becoming mobile at very low saturations, a few percent only, in these seepage systems, where most of the hydrogen is dissolved in the water, and there's only small quantities of hydrogen gas moving up, resource density is very low. It's like between 2 to 3 orders of magnitude less than it would be if in the same rock, same thickness, same properties, hydrogen is trapped as a gas. Which is why I keep saying that these settings where hydrogen is not trapped as a gas, but it's mostly dissolved in the water and seeping through maybe via migration pathways, that these will be extremely difficult to exploit at commercial scale. And that is simply because when you work out how big an area of resource you need to prove, for example, to secure 10 years of supply, even to a small fueling station, it's big areas.
Thank you, Arnout. Doug?
Yeah, I mean, Arnold brings up some very good points, and I would differ, though, in direct application of oil and gas areas to this. And first of all, oil and gas is found in fairly narrow bands in the subsurface. You know, the oil field deposits, you know, they are not kilometers thick. They're pooling in small areas. And when we look at the rocks required for hydrogen generation by the different mechanisms, whether it's an equilibrium release from hydrides, as Vitaly is an advocate, or through reactions of olivine, or through some other mechanism, I have no idea. the rocks that we're using are very thick. I look at some of the deposits that are out there and say, the depth of these are huge. I mean, I can point to a deposit that's been talked to in Minnesota, the Tamarack Bowl. This is kilometers thick of micro-fractured olivine, which is much different than what would find. The other thing to consider, and I agree, pumping that much water, lifting that much water, that would be a challenge. The important thing to note that in the Omani example that Alexis did, the peridotite she addressed was dry. So there are dry rocks down there, and the method she used for recovery did have lifting of water, but given the amount of gas that was evolving from this and coming out, they didn't set up to get free gas. There might have been free gas down there. There might be separation methods we can use in the subsurface, so we don't have to pull out thousands of kilograms of water per kilogram of water, of hydrogen.
People
I can see you're disagreeing, so I will then.
I can
Before you disagree, I want to bring in the Vitaly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So after spending some time with oil and gas, I have some understanding of how it works. For example, in case of fracking, right? So you drill a well, which is a small cylinder of emptiness in the rock. And when you start fracking it in the open hole, you pump liquids under huge pressure. So the formation cracks, and those cracks and fractures, they expand, but they do not protrude very, very far from this initial cylinder, from the borehole. So several meters, a couple of dozen meters tops. It depends on the petrophysics. It depends on the formation and on the liquids pressure. So provided we can do the same with ultramafic rocks, BIFs, how far, biggest question is how far, and how far these fractures could protrude, could expand, and how many fractures can we create. So in fact, we expand this smaller cylinder into a bigger one, several meters, maybe several dozen meters in diameter. So the frequency, the density of those fractures is one thing, and the intensity of the reaction is another thing. So these two factors combined give us more or less precise volume of hydrogen, which could be generated through this process. What's next? If we refrag it, it's likely that the fractures, the new fractures, are not going to be formed because we already have some fractures in this volume. So this is easily calculatable, and not that I attempted to calculate it, but I believe this could be done, and the case should be proven before we start practical trials.
Thank you, Vitaly. Arnout.
Yeah. Okay. So two things. One is I give both response to what Douglas was saying. Is that I'm not okay. First, with regards to this resource estimates, I'm not saying that settings for oil and gas are comparable with those of where hydrogen is found. All I'm saying is that we can use the same principles that we use to compute how much oil and gas is trapped in a rock, that we can use those same principles to calculate how much hydrogen could be trapped in that same rock, because it's simply how much pore volume is there is simply a matter of porosity and thickness of the thing, and then what people call formation volume factor, which is how much the fluid that's in there can be compressed. So it's the same principle. So when you run these numbers for different hydrogen systems, so the system where the hydrogen is dissolved in the aquifer versus where it's trapped as a free gas, then you find that the resource density, if it's just dissolved in the water, is very low, which means that to connect to sufficient resource, I need to connect to a big area. So that's one. Then the other response I wanted to give is to this to the note about Alexis Templeton and this production of hydrogen. So there are people who've actually simulated with a numerical simulator, thermal simulator. They've simulated or a dynamic a dynamic thermal simulator, something like, I think they use Steam Gears or maybe Eclipse. But you can simulate in a numerical simulator. You can simulate this process of injecting water and then basically trying to produce back this hydrogen. And what people find is that you have to produce almost all the water back that you injected. And why is that? Is because what people call relative permeability. So if you only have small fractions of hydrogen generated in these microfractures, water is the main mobile phase. Hydrogen bubbles up, but if you try to apply a pressure drawdown, you get water.
So this is the reason I love these series, because we are already 1 hour into it and I haven't had a chance to read the first topic at all, but we're talking about it. Doug.
Yes.
Your reply to Arnout and Vitaly.
My reply is, again, I agree with Arno a lot that if we're just looking for hydrogen that's, in the system itself, you can estimate it's going to be very low. The solubility of hydrogen in water, even at pressure, is extremely low. And by the way, the thing to keep in mind, somewhat similar to Vitaly's metallic hydride efforts, that this is an equilibrium concentration at depth. People forget that the reaction does go backwards. If you take iron oxide, iron 3 oxide plus hydrogen, you go towards iron 2 and iron 0. So in the subsurface, the concentrations we're seeing are limited by equilibrium concentrations. And, again, the engineering in me says, let's trick the system and let's shift it out of equilibrium. And that shifting it out of equilibrium means produce hydrogen. Same thing with the metal hydrides. It's an equilibrium reaction. It goes back and forth. This is very similar to the metal hydrides that are being used for transportation and storage of hydrogen. It's an equilibrium process, and it's finding the conditions that allow you to control that equilibrium that are needed. These are engineering problems. And if you come back and look at the reactive concentrations of things such as iron 2 in the subsurface, then you get a very different number of saying if you're going to address these. Rather than the solubility within within the water that's in the absorbed pores. And so with that bell, I'll let Vitaly go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yep. So thank you very much for giving me a couple of points to develop on. Number one, Arnout, have to disappoint you one more time. Hydrogen do not form pressurized, especially pressurized deposits in the subsurface, because it's A, very volatile, and B, extremely chemically active, we can say aggressive. So with time, which some of our colleagues tend to forget about, with geological time, it chews through any cap rock, and it simply doesn't reside in the deposits, especially pressurized ones. As for the hydrides, thank you very much, Doug. Thank you for bringing it up. In the Earth core, these reactions go one way, because hydrogen gets evacuated once it is released by the hydrides as a result of radiogenic heating. It vacates the system and streams towards ascends towards the surface in streams, in jet streams. We call them chimneys, as per Vladimir Larin's primordial hydridic Earth concept. So on the surface, yes, these reactions go back and forth, but not in the Earth core. And the last but not the least, serpentinization and ferrolysis cannot produce commercial quantities of hydrogen, period, paragraph, as been stipulated by several researchers, such as Alexis Templeton last year, Jessica Murray 2020. And we have to address natural hydrogen as a dynamic system, as been stipulated by Dr. Omar Maiga 2 years ago.
Thank you so much. I will actually expand your reply times to 3 minutes for everyone because I see this is very interesting. Arnout.
Oh, where was I? Yeah, I agree with you, Vitaly, that actually I reckon that pressure, basically hydrogen trapped as a free gas in porous and permeable reservoir is going to be very difficult to find. There's going to be, I'm not saying it's completely impossible, but I reckon if very big hydrogen gas fields similar to natural gas fields, if they existed, I reckon we would already have found some. And the fact that we haven't tells you something. Also, what I keep telling people at every opportunity I find is that we must look at pressure data from basically hydrogen exploration wells. So in a well, normally you always an operator always takes pressure points to see whether the formation pressures, whether they follow a water gradient or a gas gradient, because gas gradients are key evidence of free gas. And just a few days back, since this information has now become public, the data from Ramsay 1 and 2, I've checked. Yeah, they took MDT data, and guess what? It's all hydrostatic. So I reckon, and from what I've seen in US, this high-terra stuff also is hydrostatic. So there's no gas. There's no free gas there. If there is, very small pockets. So it's essentially what this is hydrogen in mostly dissolved in the water and maybe very, very small quantities of residual gas. And if you apply a little bit of a pressure drawdown, for example, if you drill the well in the balanced, like a water well, then you get a little bit of this hydrogen bubbling out. So you see gas shows and people get excited, but it doesn't mean anything.
So you have 1 more minute if you want.
No, I think to me, I think Vitaly and I are on the same page that I think we both agree that these pressurized gas fields, they're very rare. I'd say let's still keep looking for them, because to me these are the only type of assets that can produce at industrial scale, where you, for example, can supply a petroleum refinery or an ammonia plant or a big steel plant. I reckon to do this with wells drilled in seepages is going to be very, very difficult. You'll need lots and lots of wells.
Yeah, thank you. Doug, back to you.
It's one of those things that I look at and say, I'm in agreement that we're not. I mean, again, I'm the one who's probably the biggest advocate to say there's not going to be the Permian Basin of free hydrogen out there that we can just tap into and pull out unlimited amounts of material. I do beg to differ on the stimulation side. I do think it can go. The advancements that have taken place in the U.S. in terms of addressing the subsurface, if we have to go to hydraulic fracturing, the penetration of hydraulic fractures is not just meters, it's kilometers. The work being done by Liberty Energy shows, that they've found crack formations that go out almost 2 kilometers within the surface and lead to highly productive wells. And so I don't, I will not doubt the ability of our oil field engineers to do what we need them to do in terms of that. And I think the other thing to look for is these dry, highly fractured rocks. They tend to be ignored by a lot of people. I mean, that's, I like my discussions with the head geologist of Rio Tinto, who's now at, now working at Talon Metals, is he sent geologists out all the time looking for nickel, and they kept on finding highly fractured olivine all over the place, and peridotite. And it's these highly fractured materials. They really don't like them because you can't mine into them. It's like trying to mine into sand. They have no competence. So I think there's resources out there that our geologists knew about, but they looked at it for the case that they had and said we don't want it. So I think there's plenty of possibilities in the deep subsurface, because really, as I always like to say, the Earth doesn't care what we think. The Earth is happily doing its own thing down there, and just because we're ignoring it doesn't mean the Earth isn't doing it. And so no, I think there are key possibilities for development of sites in the deep subsurface. I think that due to equilibrium conditions, and Vitaly, yes, the rate of escape from these metal hydrides is dependent on thermodynamic equilibrium. And if you have a crack that lets it go, yeah, it's all going to go. If you have small cracks that back up the pressure, I can guarantee you hydrides formed from metal surfaces and hydrogen at pressure and temperature. So it is an equilibrium. So
Thanks, Doug and Vitaly, for the final circle.
Well, thank you much. Thanks, Arnout. I couldn't agree more with you that the pressure basically equalizes, and since we have to look at the processes in Mother Earth in their dynamics retrospectively, everything sooner or later becomes equalized, and Mother Nature has plenty of time, all the time in the universe for that. So yes, thanks for agreeing with me. We hard land on the point that hydrogen cannot form the pressurized deposit, and I hope the rest of the industry will agree with us, because this is not what we keep hearing on the web and in the public space. 90% keep talking about exploring for deposits, because this is probably the most of the explorers forms the most of the explorers comfort zone, which they are unable to step out, but they will have to, because this event in Paris last month, the main conclusion was that, hey, we have to say bye-bye to this fancy idea. And this is where we start differing with the oil and gas guys, sweet bye-bye. So yes, the new challenge is to step out. And what's next? Well, once again, we are eagerly looking forward to the industry to accept the flux dynamic model, and where we have excelled and professed. And because we have the technology, we have the methods to identify those fluxes, those streams, those chimneys. And chimney term was borrowed from the offshore oil and gas, chimneys of gas in the unconsolidated deposits. on the ocean bottom, on the seaboard. So yes, and I'm very curious about the stimulated hydrogen, especially about the rates, whether they could be commercially sustained or not. Thank you very much.
So I don't want to really impact the conversation that much, but I will just read the title of our next topic and add some flavor from a chat, because at the end you will see the chat later, and please do try to answer these questions by yourselves, because we will not have enough time today if we start answering these. So our second topic is, when do anomaly maps become actual assets? We're covered in maps: soil, gas belts, multi-kilometer corridors, beautiful color scales. It's like Instagram for geochemists. But when does someone stop making maps and start booking rigs? And on that note, we had some comments. QIMC has bought some land, I think in Canada, and then some companies just bought some more land around it, a few companies. So let's talk about that a little bit. Arnout, you're back on.
Oh, okay. So the way I see it is that even if someone, an operator, makes a discovery, say for example now, despite the fact that I from what I can see, it's all hydrogen dissolved in water because it's at hydrostatic pressure. But say gold hydrogen now with the REM-4, say they make a discovery, then still there's a long road going from just one well with positive indications of hydrogen, maybe as a free gas. Maybe they do find some gas in fractured reservoir there. Then to basically from there establish how big this pool is and whether it's big enough to in terms of resource size to support the project, and also whether productivity extends far enough, because maybe the resource extends but productivity is only in a few places. This will take considerable time. So I reckon in reality natural hydrogen projects, even if exploration is successful, they will go through a lengthy phase of production pilots, where basically you try and put some of these wells on production for an extended period of time, and also you step out and try and basically prove up more area. I reckon that what we will see is resource maturation, a bit similar to the resource maturation in shale gas or in CBM, with small production pilots. And the struggle is going to be these production pilots, how can they be commercial? Because small quantities of hydrogen, what are you going to do with it? You can't even pay for any surface processing. And let alone if with the hydrogen there's also other stuff like CO2 and nitrogen. I mean, nitrogen you could probably vent, but CO2, what are you going to do with it? So this is where I see the challenge, and that's why I keep saying, look, natural hydrogen, there's no way on Earth significant quantities of hydrogen are going to come to the markets as basically commercially by 2030. No way. It's just people, I don't know, in La La Land to say this. It's going to be, even if exploration is successful, projects will go through a lengthy phase of production pilots, trying to build confidence about extent of the resource, productivity of the resource, and then eventually, if everything is positive, then they can start looking at putting facilities there and looking for buyers.
Thank you, Arnout. I love the La La Land comparison. Doug.
As one who lives in La La Land called Washington, D.C., I'll make some comments, and I agree with Arno and many things. And I look at the world of tight gas, again, coming back to this. And, the fundamental work for tight gas was done in the 1980s. By the U.S. government. I mean, the National Energy Technology Laboratory developed horizontal drilling. They developed fracking. This was all done in the 80s, and it really wasn't until some rebels trying to monetize a dying gas field used it in the 1990s, and nobody believed him.
Yeah,
And it went along, and finally Devon believed it and bought the assets, and um, then I think there was an article published by Exxon or in 2000 that said, this is all fake. It doesn't exist. So there's lots of doubters out there about all these different technologies. It's easy to predict failure. It's really hard to predict success. If you predict that everything's going to fail, you're going to be right a fair amount of the time, but you're going to miss the successes. And so, again, I think Arno hits on one key aspect is how do we monetize that first kilogram? We are not going to relocate steel plants to a wish. We are not going to build a pipeline to this. And that's why I work a lot in the area of how do we transport the hydrogen. And I look at the discussion we've had with Prometheus, to say we can monetize the first kilogram without needing to have 5-stage hydrogen compressors or liquefaction capabilities. We can get energy densities, hydrogen densities that you can transport without using tube trailers and the likes. And so coming up with those mechanisms to say, how do we monetize the beginning is the real challenge. With natural gas, it was relatively easy. There was a natural gas pipeline going by. So if you produced it, you just shoved it into the pipeline. We don't have that for hydrogen, which is why I think it's important for aspects like Renaissance philanthropies coming out and saying, let's develop the test beds. Let's come up with the methods to do this, and Renaissance is stepping forward because there is not that government support that would be really needed to drive this. And I think this is a key role either for nonprofits or for government to come in and say, is there something there to go forward? It's high risk. Right now, it's all based on venture money, which is, very high risk money. But we need a consistent investment in the field to address the questions of, the biggest question is, what is the recoverable reserve from any of these topics we're talking about, whether it's a highly pressurized hydrogen myth that's out there, whether it's serpentinization, whether it's harvesting these chimneys that are coming out of the subsurface. We need dedicated long-term research, and what we started at ARPA-E, just the beginning. People saying, well, we spent $20 million, to do this. Why don't we have results that show we have, commercial production? It's like, excuse me, we've spent, $100 billion worldwide on electrolyzers, and they still haven't gotten it. We've spent $100 billion plus on fusion, and it's still 30 years away. Maybe it's 30, maybe it's 29 years, 11 months, and 29 days off of that $100 billion investment. But, things take time and they need dedicated activities. And I'm in agreement with Arno. Right now, we're not going to have a gusher of hydrogen coming out. But I do think if we can monetize that first kilogram, that we will have commercial production by 2030.
Thank you. So back to Vitaly.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, to address this commercialization part, this is what we do from the very beginning in our work, in our model. We just start with the off-take landscape, as I mentioned earlier, and this gives us a clear understanding of where this first kilogram or first 1,000 of kilograms of hydrogen could be used. So just if I could share my screen to the original question, which is how do we turn those anomaly maps to to drillable targets in our case, right? So what you see on the screen is the first in the world, the first commercialization strategy, exploration strategy for natural hydrogen before drilling. We call it de-risking strategy because it helps us to de-risk the most expensive part of the whole story, the drilling. And this strategy is based on a typical subsurface philosophy. We go from large territories through areas of interest towards smaller locations and deep and back in time. We study things in depth and relatively so. We study geodynamics, we study paleotectonics and so forth. And yes, then when we go to the field, we get this is the from one of our projects. This is the illustrative picture. This is the real one. So you can see the scale on the right-hand side, and the depth is less than 2 meters. So this is this map was obtained by utilizing one of our proprietary soil sampling techniques, which we keep in house, developed in house, and keep proprietary. We don't disclose it like we disclosed the soil gas detection 15 years ago, and now every company in the world are using it. And then we go from 2D to 3D. And this is where most of our peers don't really have anything to match our language, our experience, because we use geophysics, but the methods we use are different from what the rest of the industry are using. And if you look at the left-hand side, this is one of the methods we use. At the top, you see the transect across the hydrogen anomaly, and ppm scale on the left. It's small numbers, but up to 1,000 ppm. So if the well is drilled based on the soil gas detection alone, drilled predictably enough into the highest peak, they will get their feed coal. Nothing here, but because the chimneys are elsewhere. This is what we need the geophysics for. Thank you very much.
So, Arnout, back to you.
Yeah. All right. I think I agree with what Doug was saying before, is that in fact, I also, since Vitaly shared his screen, maybe I also share my screen for a second to just show basically one of the slides that I use in my, so basically here, I put it in slide view, because basically Doug was referring to the story of how basically shale production and tight gas production, how it evolved. And indeed, he's absolutely right. Basically, the resource was identified in the late 70s. And then throughout the 80s to early 90s, some of the supporting technology was developed. So horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracking. In 86 was the first horizontal hydraulically fracked shale well. And then throughout the 90s, there was an operator called Mitchell. They were basically trialing doing field trials in the Barnett. And only by 1997, they managed to get the first well. They figured out eventually that basically a multi-stage frac, so 3-stage hydraulic fracking, that this was required to get to economic flow rates. And then, so in 1997, they finally had a well that could produce it, something that was potentially commercial. And it still took another 10 years for production to really ramp up, because then what happened is that other operators came in and they started grabbing land and developing projects. But developing projects takes time. So anyway, that's basically the story of the shale, which I think is good to for the audience to understand this. And then I mean, look, Douglas knows way more than I do about facilities at surface for processing hydrogen and all that, and what technology can bring there. So I can only basically say, yeah, if he and other people, if they can work on small mobile facilities that can be used to bring hydrogen that you produce from the subsurface, bring it to a purity where you can do something with it. So you get rid of the water vapor, you get rid of other gases that are mixed with it. That will be great, because it will help bridge this phase where, okay, now I've discovered some hydrogen, I can produce it at a flow rate that is meaningful, but I still don't know how long this production is going to sustain. I don't know how far this productivity, how it extends. So I need to do pilots, and these pilots can only be pay for themselves if you can process this hydrogen to a purity where you can sell it.
Thanks, Arnout. Back to Doug.
I think we're coming into agreement here that it's a hard challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then kind of going back to Arno's original presentation on the large users that should be targeted, I differ on that. As I say, as we begin to develop this, that if you look at just the U.S. market, we have 2,500 compressed hydrogen tube trailers serving a merchant market. I mean, there are many users of hydrogen out there. So if we can come up with a system that does not require the implementation of a 5-stage compressor to put it into a tube trailer, which is, a 5-stage compressor is not free. And at remote locations, it requires incredible infrastructure to put it in. It's a major capital expense. But if we can get that process of saying, how do we economically purify and store the hydrogen in a way that can be transported, there's a huge merchant market to begin to identify this. And much of that merchant market, the price point is very high when you compare it to the SMR feeding into a ammonia plant. So I think that there is a market that we can develop and do these resource activities going forward. And I really appreciate the slide that you showed on the timeline. That's a really good slide, and if you could share it, I'd be appreciative. And the real question comes back is, how do we compress that? How do we shorten that? How do we develop the common knowledge and using, advancements in information technologies, in subsurface analysis to really compress that down, rather than, having the entire industry sit on the sidelines for 10 years watching Mitchell going, yeah, it's going to fail. It's going to fail. It's going to fail. How do we, as a community, drive that quicker so that we develop the geophysical models to identify resource assessments, regardless of where the hydrogen's coming from? And a lot of that comes from shared information. And, it really wasn't until the geophysics caught up with Mitchell that people came back and said, okay, pilot, well, you do this, you see this on geophysics, you have this many billion cubic meters of addressable natural gas or oil, that can be coming out. But it's that slow process that we need to really short circuit. And one of the things that my colleague at Renaissance, Ishan Sharma, is really driving is to say, how do we compress that timeline from a 30-year timeline to a 5 to 10-year timeline?
Thank you. And final round for Vitaly before the questions.
Yep. Thank you very much. The best way to compress the time from 30 years into 10 years is to utilize the experience which was accumulated earlier by some other people. Let's put it this way. I'm trying to be modest here. So and we just watch the industry making the same missteps we've made several decades ago. Not a lot of fun, because money and time are wasting. We offer our collaboration, but it doesn't always meet understanding. As for the distributed resources and distributed off-taking, so with natural hydrogen, the story is different. If we stop concentrating on oil and gas, which resources are constrained to mostly sedimentary basins, as we know, natural hydrogen could be discovered in multiple very different geotectonical setups, situations, right? Which gives us a what we call geographical/geological versatility. On the other hand, natural hydrogen is not supposed to always come in huge commercial quantities, volumes. So, which leads to the concept of distributed energy generation, distributed off-taking. And for example, apart from small power generation stations, there is a similar concept with ammonia, small modular manufacturing facilities, which they're semi-portable, which could be containerized and mobilized real quick, basically with very few prerequisites and infrastructure in place before then. And but so co-location can go both ways. Bring the off-taking facility closer to the resource of hydrogen, and vice versa. This is what we offer through our hydrogen on demand go-to-market model. As for the resources evaluation, once again, we are different here because since natural hydrogen it does not seem to be residing in deposits, we have to get accustomed to the concept of evaluating the flows. So many cubic meters or kilos per day per across a certain standard cross section. Same as natural gas wells flow rates are evaluated. So this is probably what we have to get accustomed to. Thank you.
So, before we close, and believe it or not, we are already over 90 minutes in. There's no script for this. Actually, there was a script. We didn't follow it, but still it was great. We have so many comments in a LinkedIn, which our speakers will address to later on in writing. But for now, before we close, I want to bring in the people who will actually have to live with the consequences of your predictions, and that is our audience. We'll take at least one question. So here's the one that's interesting. We're seeing surge of hydrogen claims in Nova Scotia, QMC, Coloma, Rio Tinto, and so on. A region that was once connected to West Africa. From your expert perspective, does the current exploration frenzy reflect strong geological fundamentals? Whoever wants to take it first.
I'll jump into that. And, I think it does represent what the different exploration companies view as geologic fundamentals. The question is, are they consistent? I mean, there's, the geography of Nova Scotia is very different than the Mali wells, for example. But it may be very similar to, the expectations of finding hydrogen sources in Morocco. And so I think the models are developing. Right now, those are within individual companies. Is there a fundamental understanding of where it's going to come from? No.
Maybe I add to that if I can. So in my view in general at the natural hydrogen exploration scene to date is that I don't see a lot of very confident exploration ongoing. I see companies that are merely re-drilling or drilling very close to wells with legacy wells with historic hydrogen shows, and to me, if you look at oil and gas exploration, exploration is done based on proper models and with proper high grading of prospects. So where basically once an operator drills a well, they drill it on something where it's very clear what is the reservoir, what is they've identified what they think are the sources, what is the seal. So the whole what they call petroleum system, the different elements, you can see it. Now, if I look at what Gold Hydrogen, for example, in Australia are doing, or Hytera, and the little bits and pieces that you see of Coloma, I don't see how this system works. I don't see a clearly identified. Well, they have some ideas of where sources might be, but there's no clear identification of what is the reservoir, how productive might it be, what would be the seal. Nothing. They just drilling basically legacy wells. So I don't think this is a good avenue to success. I think what companies need to do is they need to start working, do proper play to prospect maturation, then work out a portfolio of prospects, high grade best ones, and then drill those. Which means that you're not drilling next door to a well drilled in the 1930s. You may be drilling somewhere in a real frontier, but where you believe you have a prospect that you think is the best in your portfolio.
Thank you. And Vitaly.
Yeah, thank you. Well, using historical wells as a primary source of data is, in our opinion, unwise, because those wells were drilled many, many years ago for something completely different, different physically, different chemically, and so forth. And hydrogen was not really a target. And in fact, lots of operators tried to conceal this data because they didn't know what to do with hydrogen. So now all of a sudden, using those historical wells, the companies, the explorers, keep using them because it impresses the investors. It shows them in clear black and white that there was hydrogen once, regardless that it was accidental and there was no flow. And B, I suspect, in my humble opinion, that those explorers don't have anything better to do with their data, just using historical wells. If we turn to Nova Scotia, then we have to separate the first comer, QIMC, the first company which pegged the land, and started exploring and achieved very good results. Very impressive, very convincing results, and I don't have any shares in QIMC, so so I'm not advertising it here. So, and the other companies which came along afterwards, they just do the land grabbing, and I think I addressed it already that it's not a very wise way to do things, because those anomalies are very geographically constrained to some very small, tight structures, geomorphological structures on the surface. So pegging the land around it is just following the suit, and this is it, in our opinion, once again. And well, we will see if those other companies have any luck. QIMC, I'm applauding to their bravery because they pursue the flux dynamic model like us. And this is why, once again, this is how we explain their success, because they know what they're doing. They put a lot of science behind.
Thank you. And since you're here, let's start with the closing thoughts. 1 minute each. Vitaly.
Well, thank you very much for this wonderful session. I believe, I hope that, and this is the optimistic note for the closing statement, that somewhere, maybe in hopefully not so distant future, we all will come to the agreement about natural hydrogen origin, migration, and development strategies and technologies. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a great pleasure.
Arnout.
Yeah, I can only echo indeed that I think, well, first of all, I hope that we've given the audience some useful thoughts and insights. I think
Definitely.
we've definitely reached agreement that it's not so easy. So it is not basically a slam dunk to basically go and find and commercialize natural hydrogen. I think there's many challenges ahead, and an integrated approach, but also a recognition that it's going to take time, and that it's going to take a collaborative effort. It needs breakthroughs on the geology side, but breakthroughs on the engineering side, both subsurface and surface, to make this happen. I think this is starting to emerge, at least in my perspective. That's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug,
Yeah, I think the audience should say that there's differing approaches to where we're going to go. I don't know if we'll ever come up with a unified theory. I will say the oil companies still have their own visions of how oil is produced in the subsurface, and so there's very many different models and evolving models of what we can do. But the major thing to know is there's a lot of work to be done, and it will be sped up if we collaborate and openly discuss our systems and our models versus keeping them all hidden and underground.
thank you, Doug. Thank you all for today's session. Really amazing session. And now we are going to wrap it up here. Douglas, Arnout, Vitaly, thank you for investing your time in this live session instead of hiding behind carefully edited PDFs. For everyone watching, natural hydrogen is an open experiment with real geology, real money, and real consequences. Whether it becomes a serious part of the energy transition depends on the kind of work we've talked about today. Long-term tests, honest reporting, and people willing to say we don't know yet on camera. If you learned something, share the reply with the most skeptical person you know and the most enthusiastic person you know. If they both hate you afterwards, you've done a good job. I'm Adnes Biogradlia. This is Energy News Face to Face. See you in the next one.